Since the pandemic, we've seen this huge rise in the cost of shipping. Are we at the end of that cycle, do you think now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we are going to have at least a year more of fairly high freight rates, if not longer. So I think I said this previously, but 1.5 years ago, in May last year, global shipping lines were looking at potentially combined losses of about $20 to $25 billion. People were saying this is going to be the worst cycle of all. This year, global shipping lines are expected to make about $150 billion, anywhere between $120 and $150 billion. Many of them will make more money than they've ever made before.
Hello and welcome to Echelon. Today we're discussing Sri Lanka's logistics and hub ambitions with Romesh David. Romesh is the chief executive of Sri Lanka's first privately developed container terminal, which we call South Asia Gateway Terminals, or SAGT. And this is a company that's now more or less controlled by John Keells Holdings. And Sri Lanka's shipping hub ambitions aren't necessarily new ones. I think in the last several decades, every government in power has professed the need to establish Sri Lanka as a transit point for east-west cargo traffic, right? And Sri Lanka's current ranking, which is about 21 or 22 among the globe's largest container ports, is fairly credible, and it's made some gains in the last decade or so with private sector investment, particularly in the port sector. So if you sort of apply broadly the potential that Sri Lanka has, we've been talking about this point at which both east and west shipping lines have to pass somewhere close to Sri Lanka's southernmost point, right? Take a long view, take a broad view. What are those potential opportunities you think we have that we can exploit or could have exploited better?
They're huge. I mean, if you just take the port business alone, the container shipping terminal business is a capacity-led business.
Right.
So lines, global shipping lines, of which, today there are really not more than about 8 or 10 major lines.
Right.
And those lines are in 3 major alliances.
Sure.
And for us, we are really on the main east-west route. Now, that is the largest and the densest shipping route in the world.
Sure.
In that context, with the way shipping lines go, because the big investments are with the shipping line, the massive capital is tied up in ships, and then after that in ports. So these lines, when they are investing $200 million, $180 to $200 million in a ship or a fleet of ships, these are 20-year commitments. Now they are looking to build networks and stable networks around that kind of duration, because they are making commitments around those times. So that the container shipping as an industry lends itself, particularly around the main sea routes, lends itself to the hub and spoke concept.
Right.
And Sri Lanka is fortunate in that we are geographically well located in terms of being an efficient or a well located hub for the Arabian Gulf as well as the Bay of Bengal. Plus, we are at the foot of a big market, which is India, and we have a well-functioning port. But transshipment cargo particularly is also like capital. It goes where efficiency, it flows in the direction of the greatest efficiency. And if there are barriers to that, it's very mobile, it can go anywhere else, it can move.
Look at the conditions that have made this success possible, Romesh. If we look at the history of South Asia Gateway Terminals, which you now head, it was the first such private sector investment. Does it seem like that private capital matters? What does private capital bring to the equation that can potentially fuel growth?
I think the old truism that it was only governments invested in hard infrastructure and in capital intensive infrastructure really got put to bed by the port industry, not only here but around the world. There are still very efficient government-owned ports, but they are run as private businesses. Singapore is a great example, Dubai is a great example. But Colombo really turned the corner with the advent of SAGT in 1999 together with a big local company, which is JKH, and the P&O Group, which had a huge stake in shipping, in container shipping and ports. And then that really doubled our capacity as a port. And then what we should have done, which was at that time really perceived to be, was meant to be phase 2 of SAGT, which was ECT, never got done. And that's where I think the politics get in the way of the long-term interests and aspirations of being of a hub, of a viable hub. So, like you said, every government has been bipartisan about this. That approval, that aspiration is completely bipartisan, irrespective of which political party was in power. We always wanted to be a hub, and we still continue to want to be a maritime hub. Now, converting that conviction and that aspiration into a strategy that is also seamless and continuous, I think is one of our biggest problems. But then again, we made amends by going out with this, the South Container Terminal, which went to, which was an extremely courageous bid by China merchants at that time, because we were in the throes of the global financial crisis in 2008-9. Investing $500 million in that climate, or committing to that, was, I think, a fantastic thing for Sri Lanka. And obviously they built it in very short order. So they signed the contract, I think, in 2011 or 12, and were commercially ready by 2014. And we saw this massive spurt again in our traffic. We then plateaued again from 2018 onwards, where we should have had the next, either the ECT or the WCT come on stream. But hopefully that's now been rectified as well, and within 2 years we'll have additional capacity.
Talk to us about the potential role that private capital can play in port development. Is the sort of ambition that Sri Lanka has achievable without deploying private capital, not just in ports, but in all elements of this supply chain, global supply chain, do you think?
I have a bias, obviously. A private sector and a private investment bias. But I think without doubt the success, and here there are no exceptions, not even in Singapore and Dubai, it is private capital that really expanded the potential of every hub. Because, governments, people look to governments to build the superstructure, the breakwaters, the harbors, the dredging, the capital dredging. But everywhere else, everything that gets built around that is all private capital. So the port terminal development, the model that we have at SAGT, CICT, that we intend for WCT, there's nothing unique. It's happening all over the world.
Why doesn't it appear that we have done better attracting these kinds of investments? Now, you just mentioned that we've attracted a stream of investments into containerization of the port. Why not these other areas? Why aren't there large investments in these other areas?
So I think if I had to pick the number one reason, it is lack of consistency. Lack of a consistent policy in terms of regulation, in terms of the ability to predict how this market is going to behave for an international investor. But very close on that is also the regulatory framework. Because as I was talking a little earlier, a lot of these integrators, a lot of these logistics services providers do not separate their warehouse business from their 3PL business, from their freight forwarding business, and they simply can't afford. So unfortunately, the freight forwarding industry here also has got tagged on the same way as the shipping agency business has got tagged on, and is deemed a protected industry, which requires a minimum of Sri Lankan investment. So that's another reason why these guys haven't come in. The third reason is that typically the Sri Lankan state is the largest owner of land. And these are all land-intensive industry. You need space. To do 1 million square feet of warehousing, you need 20 acres of land with all the surrounding it, and then you need proper access. Now we have a great opportunity because our network of highways, which is the kind of stuff that governments have to build, because private capital can't do that, has now opened up huge areas of space that are brilliantly connected with the port and the airport. Now that is where I think the successive governments, and that needs to be very clearly laid out for the next 10 years, should say, okay, here's 100 acres here, here's 200 acres here, here's 500 acres here. These are logistics parks, these are fabric parks, these are, rework and transshipment parks, and get private capital to come and invest in those parks and build out, because there are plenty of investors to do that.
Is it as easy as you make it sound? It looks like we need a few tweaks and potentially freeing up real estate land in large parcels in strategic areas. If it is straightforward, what's your sense about why we can't seem to get that done?
So, Shamindra, I think one of the things is, we struggled for almost 30 years with a highly unstable security environment locally. Mm-hmm. Now, on the back of that, we also have a situation where our border controls are manic, in the sense that, and we have a customs which are all, founded on reality, founded on historical fact. So customs had to be absolutely vigilant, because it was not just about smuggled cigarettes, but it was about smuggled arms, and so the security establishment need to be deeply enmeshed with the customs organization. Well, that's behind us now. And that was also in an era where technology just did not permit the type of incisive data gathering and data usage of data that we can do today. Now, all over the world, customs are really facilitators of trade. They are there. They are an arm to ensure that there is that revenue that is due gets collected. They are simply the facilitators. They are the collectors. They are not the authority. They are not the authority. They cannot dictate the policy. They should not dictate the policy, and neither should they be a hindrance to the flow of trade. So, trade facilitation is essential if we want to, the Logistics Performance Index, for instance, is an oft-touted thing. There have been lots of flaws in the way that has been made up, but the reality is that, again, to repeat myself, if you put hindrances in the way of the flow of cargo, it will flow elsewhere. You go to Singapore, you go to Dubai, the Dubai JAFZA, Jebel Ali Free Zone Authority has built the warehouses. They will even employ the people for you. They will even invest in your machinery for you to come and plug and play there. We don't need to go all that way, because we have geographical advantage, we have the advantage of people, we have the advantage of the port and airport as well, because we are a tourism. Tourism is a big thing and will be big. So that with that comes belly capacity. So there's air capacity as well. So we have a lot of ingredients. Just need to go out there and make sure we sell it in the right way.
In terms of the reforms that we need, are these more attitudinal changes, or do we need to legislate or change some of the laws underlying some of these areas, for instance, customs?
So customs, the law is archaic and anachronistic. I mean, it is completely out of time. We are in a digital age, and this is what COVID showed us in a heartbeat, where all of a sudden you could not meet physically, and then within weeks we had a situation where cargo was being cleared electronically. Today, if I take SAGT, in January we will launch the final phase of our electronic clearance, where we will not require any intervention at all. From the time someone gets their bill of lading from the shipping line until the time the truck driver turns up at the port and picks up the container. No human intervention required at all. Everything is online, including settlement, including, so you pay for everything, you get your own delivery order, and you just come and pick up your box. Now, that should be the norm. We are doing all gaga about this. We'll be the first to do it, and I'm very confident that everyone else will follow as well, all the other terminals, and we work with a lot of lines who are very keen to get it done. But, we are a decade behind a place like Singapore. We are going to be introducing vehicle booking systems. Today we have an absolutely inefficient system of container transport to and around, within and outside the port. We don't optimize two-way transport. So once we do a vehicle booking system, we have to get people used to it. So there's a little bit of both. Now some of this requires legislation and minor tweaks to legislation. Customs requires reform and legislation, both. Implementation of the Electronic Data Processing Act and the E-Signatures Act, those are all, we have a lot of the stuff in place. Let's just make it operational. So we need to set ourselves ambitions, just like we have for building ports. We need to set ourselves ambitions around customs clearance, around clearance of cargo, around making business easy. Dubai will advertise, Dubai have a KPI that says any cargo that arrives by air can be on a ship in a container within 6 hours. Any cargo that arrives by sea can be on an aircraft within 6 hours of its landing. Now, that is aspirational. 2 years from now, we'll have a highway that will come down inside the port and end up in the airport. And it's a 20-minute journey then. So what is a 6 hour? It's nothing. There's no issue at all. So again, I think we have a God-given location. We have the great advantage of a port, and I think building everything around it is very doable.
Do you think that perception is given the background that Sri Lanka is going to be difficult to change in one sector because we are in Sri Lanka, and these are ideas that permeate because of the background that we are in currently?
But the thing is, Shaminder, I have great faith in the younger people. Right. They are not going to be as tolerant as, say, my generation saying, okay, this was always the way it was, so it should be the way. I don't think so. I think we have young people in government, we have young people in the private sector, we have young people in as entrepreneurs, and technology is a great equalizer, because what you previously needed a blue chip with bricks and mortar and a huge capital base to do, today you can be a technologist and a technology business and pull all of it together and still create value. So I think we are going to see that happening in Sri Lanka. E-government is a huge part of that because we have a huge public sector. Now, I don't think we can wish that away. 1.2 million public servants. Hopefully that's going to be now frozen for a few years to come. But it still doesn't alter the fact that a lot of our services are public, hinge around public sector providing those services. Now we have to make that more efficient. Even if it means paying people to stay at home or paying people to work from home or just driving efficiency. Now that we have provided the employment, I think we should leave the employment there, let it be as it is. No one needs to be made redundant. But let's look at the process and let's make that efficient. And then we will see the benefit of all of that flowing through. And we need to be able to create an environment where more people have employment. That's it.
There have been several changes or several forces driving change in the logistics industry. I think, we are seeing currently a massive boom in the industry. What do you think the big players who may be interested in investing here would want? I mean, there are ownership restrictions around how much ownership a shipping line can have of an agency business. Is that a real bugbear for development?
I don't think so. I mean, it is an irritant. But a shipping line, a global shipping major is not going to have investment on either side of its core business predicated on whether it owns the agency business or not, whether it owns a majority. It is a hindrance, and I believe in, and this is very personal to me, I think it is a needless hindrance because we are sort of swimming against the tide. But I don't think it will prevent a Maersk line or a CMA or from investing, or a Hapag-Lloyd from investing in logistics facilities like warehousing, trucking, value-added services. It would not. It's not that kind of a hindrance. From a logistics services perspective, for a freight forwarder, I think it is a big hindrance because they are not going to be having separate businesses. But for the shipping lines, I think it's a period. I think it's a point in time. I think we will move on as businesses begin to add more value and see better ways in which you can create value other than through an agency business. But if you ask me whether that it's a hindrance to investment, I don't think so.
Romesh, globally, I think since COVID struck, since the pandemic, we've seen this huge rise in the cost of shipping. What do you think is driving this? Are we at the end of that cycle, do you think?
I don't think so. Okay. I think we are going to have another, at least a year more of fairly high freight rates, if not longer, if not year to 2 years. But what drove it are, fundamental imbalances and differences in the supply chain in terms of where consumption is and where production is.
Right.
So you had this huge imbalance of containers getting stuck all over the place. And because of the bottlenecks that happened as a result of labor, trucks, and shortage of people to unload warehouses, people to run empty containers back, you had this massive bottleneck of imbalance of where stuff was being made in one place when then we ran out of containers to shift it there. And then because of the vagaries of the pandemic also, you had issues where ports got stuck in a few places. You had Chinese ports, you had American ports, you had European ports that either closed or started operating at less than capacity. So I think I said this previously, but 1.5 years ago in April and May last year, global shipping lines were looking at potentially combined losses of about $20 to $25 billion. And, people were saying this is going to be the worst cycle of all. This year, global shipping lines are expected to make about $150 billion, anywhere between $120 and $150 billion. Many of them will make more money than they've ever made before. They are, I think, deserving of that because they have, over the years, they have been so cyclical and subject to so much trauma. We see a lot of them investing heavily as a result of that. But to the short question for Sri Lanka and our exports and our imports, I think we are going to be under a little bit of stress.
Finally, Romesh, the company that controls SAGT, John Keells Holdings, is investing in a new container terminal. Can you tell us where that potential agreement is? Has that been finalized? What does it mean for the Colombo port? John
Keells is common to both SAGT and will be common to WCT as well. Having said that, SAGT is controlled by a partnership of John Keells and AP Moller Maersk, who between them have 75% of the company and who run it jointly. The West Container Terminal, which is the other investment, is a partnership of John Keells and the Adani Group. The Adani Group having 51% and obviously being the lead partner. The BOT agreement was signed. I think that's in the public domain. What is left to be done is there are a few more approvals and a few more T's that need to be crossed and I's dotted before effective date and handover happens, at which time, of course, the first tranche of investment will also come in. So I would think 4 to 6 weeks from now, we should have the next milestone in terms of WCT.
Romesh David, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Shamitra.